Okay, we're good to go for YouTube.
Mary, if you're talking, I can't hear you.
Can everybody hear me? Let's see. Mary, are you trying to talk on your phone or on your computer?
Oh,
Okay.
Mary, if you're talking,
hello?
I can't hear you.
Hear me?
Should probably come back. We're having major difficulties.
Mary, there's an echo on your phone. Do you have both your computer and your phone on?
Now can you hear me?
Yeah, but you have a feedback issue.
Well, let me hang up my phone and see if I can just use my computer.
All right, because I think that you've got both your phone and your computer on. Are you trying to talk on your phone or on your computer?
Oh,
Okay.
Mary, if you're talking, I can't hear you.
hear me?
Should probably come back. We're having major difficulties.
Mary,
Is someone watching on YouTube?
all right. So can everybody hear me?
Hi,
No.
Chris, yeah.
All right, I think we had either YouTube was running somewhere or I don't know what, but I think Mary, I can't hear you, Mary. Try calling in on your phone again.
Hello?
You'll have feedback, Mary, on your phone for some reason. You need to shut off your mic on your computer, I think.
Okay, now does it work? Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
I think
Hello?
or what we sound like.
Okay, could you, is it
Yeah.
working now? Okay. So we will start this Grand County Council workshop, a workshop on Grand County Department restructuring. Chris Baird.
All right, so just for the recording, it's 2:40 p.m. Present, we have Greg Halliday, Chris Baird, Elaine Gisler, Evan Clapper, Quinn Hall, Mary McGann, Gabriel Wojtek, Jalen Hawks, Mallory Nassau, Bill Holst, Christina Sloan, Renee Baker, and other members of the public who appear to have joined. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen here of the, see if I can figure it out. Can everybody see the organizational chart?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is just kind of a general discussion on the concept of reorganizing what we're calling departments into divisions. And then those groups of divisions would then be considered departments. It's relatively standard practice in most organizations to have departments and divisions. This first page right here is a simplified version of our current organizational structure. You can see that we've got, the elected officials, which are independently elected, and then the county council. And under the county council is council administrator, assistant council administrator. And this, Mallory and I, our assistant council administrator, haven't officially determined, which departments will be supervising, but this kind of indicates that approximately half will go to one and half to the other. But as you can see, there really is no grouping of any of these departments together. They're all standalone, and they exist sort of in a horizontal linear fashion with no kind of grouping really among them. In some cases, for instance, with the current, the Community and Economic Development Department, which we're discussing rearranging now, we did put the Grand County Active Transportation and Trails under there, which, they've been referring to themselves as a division, and in reality they are, but we haven't ever officially designated them as such. It's a similar concept. And so this is the organizational structure that we're currently operating under. I would say it's not best practice. It's lacking really in any type of department division type organizational structure. And so as an example, just for the sake of discussion, I just did a quick sketch, and this is not a proposal by any means, and I don't want anybody to think that this is what I'm proposing. I would hope that, if we really wanted to pursue something like this, that we'd pull all department heads together and try to, come to some reasonable consensus on what makes sense. But as you can see, like for instance, with personnel services right now, we've already kind of done this, and I've been thinking about this as I progress along. And so with personnel services, when we retitled that department and then pulled in HR and payroll, you can see that we have a department called personnel services, two divisions, human resources and payroll, which are a natural fit together because they have to work so closely together. And as you recall, prior, payroll used to, exist under the clerk, HR was under the attorney, and there was, the only coordination that occurred was as a result of those folks taking the initiative to coordinate. But now they're housed under a single department, and it makes sense to me. That's why I moved in that direction initially. You can also see next we've got community development, and this is a concept that we've discussed, and this is probably the more poignant discussion point today, considering that we're considering a job description change for our travel council director to become economic development director. And we've removed the economic development duties from what we're now calling the planning and zoning director position. And so building inspection, planning and zoning, engineering, these are all elements that have to work closely together. And that's why I propose grouping them together into a department called community development. And then separately, economic development department, which would have, you know, 2 branches, and those 2 branches would be divvied up really according to the limitations on how we can spend money. The travel council side would be funded by the 2% of our 4.25% of TRT that has to go toward tourism, recreation, and film, the establishment of those things. And then diversification would be, you know, economic development having to do with anything else that's not recreation, tourism, or film. And so that's kind of that concept there. I mean, I suppose there's the capacity to continue on with the community and economic development department and group all of these 5 divisions together. That's another, you know, potential talking point. Moving on, in 2019, we created a new fund. It's an accounting function, essentially is all at this point called Parks, Trails, and Recreation. It's Fund 47 in our accounting. And we did that kind of with the idea that at some point in time, we would have a department, an actual department called Parks, Trails, and Recreation. Right now, the only division, so to speak, that's operating underneath that fund is the Grand County Active Trails and Transportation, and that's what GCAT stands for right here. But if you really kind of broaden your horizons about all of the parks, trails, and recreation oriented divisions in the county, we have Sand Flats. We have the potential that we're in discussion for taking on a new smaller camping area called Dalton Wells. We've got Grand County Active Transportation and Trails. We've got the Old Spanish Trail Arena, and we've got the Grand Center. These are all elements that, you know, are similar enough that they could probably be captured under a Department of Parks, Trails, and Recreation. And of course, we got the Roads Department, some of these others that may not, you know, necessarily be eligible to get grouped in with other things. Maybe not, maybe not. Airport, maintenance, information technology, the library, weed control. And so this is just kind of opening up the discussion about, you know, how the council feels about this type of concept of organization. There is kind of a broader, potentially broader discussion of attempting to bring in independently elected officials into departments as well, because we know that, especially with regard to finance, that the assessor, the treasurer, the clerk auditor, and then the budget officer all have to work closely together, and all sum total would be, you know, essentially a finance department. But, you know, obviously within the constructs of dealing with independently elected officials, there can't be a typical hierarchy, but you could group them together into the department, you know, which may assist, I think, in coordination among those different offices and departments as need be. I think some of the advantages to this type of structure is that as the county grows and more positions are needed or added, that we don't just keep, you know, putting them off to the side of this very flat organizational structure. It's more likely that they'll have a place where they can fit into a hierarchy and slot in a logical fashion. And it doesn't continue to add to the burden of, you know, 1 or 2 people trying to coordinate across many departments across the entire county. And considering that a lot of these really do have to work together very closely, it's useful, for instance, I think, to have somebody who's responsible to make sure that that coordination occurs in these little groupings, you know. And I think that when you put that all on 1 or 2 people, like the council administrator or the assistant council administrator, and they're trying to, you know, deal with all the details of taking care of the council's business, And then, you know, getting into any nitty gritty details about trying to coordinate different departments that should be working together more closely, it can be quite a strain. And so that's why I think that, you know, if there's some concept that you're all part of one department and you need to figure out how to coordinate, you know, effectively with one another, that can be helped by the organizational structure itself. And, you know, there's a number of different ways to look at how these would be, how the hierarchies would work. And obviously the most expensive, which we probably can't afford, would be, you know, creating a director, a new director position for each department, you know. And I think that in some cases, in larger organizations, that would probably be an acceptable solution. But, you know, I don't particularly foresee that we'd be able to create a new position just to be the director of a department. And so there's two, you know, a couple other alternatives that I can think of. One is that one of these division managers would also function as the department director. Or, you know, you could create some kind of joint committee of division managers that would be jointly responsible to essentially act as the director of the department. That's just kind of some brainstorming, some ways to, you know, effectuate this type of organizational structure without incurring a lot of budgetary increases. But then, like I say, you know, there's some capacity to also, if we can swing it, incorporate potentially other elected offices into the department structure, not from a hierarchical perspective, but just from a perspective of trying to organize the county in a way that makes sense. So anyway, I just open it up for discussion there. It's not, you know, it's fairly broad at this point. And I think that, like I say, if we really wanted to move in this direction, I think it would require a lot of workshops, working with all the existing department heads to try to get some consensus, you know.
Does anybody
think-
have any comments?
I would comment that, you know, doing the reviews for the previous administrator, it often kind of came up this issue of the very flat organization, all the direct reports that the administrator has historically and currently is responsible for. And I think it makes sense to limit that some, to kind of have less people reporting to an individual. I think we got that feedback in the job survey that we paid for a few years ago. And I think that it's probably overdue to move in that direction. And so I think some workshops with department heads is totally makes sense to figure out a way to achieve that.
Hey, Chris,
Yeah.
how does this compare to other fifth-class counties?
I don't know, Greg. That's something I guess we could do some research on. As you're probably aware, Grant County is unusual in relation to other fifth-class counties because we've got so many tourists. But you know, we could do some research into organizational structure of like third, fourth, fifth, and take a look. But you know, just in reviewing a handful of other organizational charts, you know, it's pretty common to see a department division structure like this.
Yeah, it looks good.
It's less common really to see this type of structure where there are no, you know, there's just departments and no divisions. And in reality, you know, these are all more divisions than departments. What we're really missing is the departments. We have the divisions. We call them departments, but they're really divisions. And there are no departments. There's just kind of like one department, which is, you know, the whole thing. But to me, it makes sense on a lot of different aspects. Like I say, you know, I think that there's beyond just, you know, the supervisory demand on council administrator and assistant council administrator. I mean, to a degree, that's somewhat been resolved by changing the office coordinator position to a supervisory position so that we can split that up. But it really goes beyond just that concept alone. And, you know, what I am more interested in is grouping divisions into departments that, with some expectation that they work on increasing efficiency and collaboration between those divisions. And I think that that's something that, you know, if somebody's not responsible for that, then it may not happen, or it may not happen as well as we hope it would. And so, you know, that's part of it for me, you know, is that, for instance, you know, we've got Old Spanish Trail Arena, Grand Center, various recreational assets. They kind of operate autonomously and out there by themselves. There's not a lot of collaboration across these different county assets, you know, in terms of collaboration or any kind of brainstorming of enhanced use of these facilities. And so when things just kind of hang out there by themselves, completely separate from everything else, it does worry me a little bit that they're not, you know, as being as useful to the citizens as they could be.
I'll weigh in. I think this is great and brilliant and long needed. I do have concerns, and I think the groupings make a ton of sense, but like you say, I have concerns about how in practice it would increase our efficiency without putting money into additional director levels, especially the Parks, Trails, and Rec Department, which I think makes a lot of sense, but I think we'd need to create a new position to lead that department. And I think community and economic development in the long run probably does make sense, but what I've seen is that it's not working for now. Our economic development diversification department hasn't really gotten off its feet, for one, and the planning department really just needs a lot of focus and attention on details. And so I like breaking those two out for now, but I could see, you know, many years down the road potentially joining them together with a separate director level new position to oversee them. And when you guys are going through this, and I haven't talked with Mallory, and hopefully she's not mad at me, but I beg you to put the Family Support Center under the Assistant Council Administrator as its own separate thing. It, you know, as you guys know, the Family Support Center is in my department, and it provides crisis daycare for kids in town. Most of those kids have nothing to do with the criminal justice system, have nothing to do with the work that my office is doing. It ended up in my department many years ago when Happy Morgan was county attorney, because we needed this crisis care and there was no one else willing to take it on, but Happy was. So she started up our version of the Family Support Center. There are many of these across the state, and Grand County and Carbon County are the only two counties operating family support centers. All the others are operated as nonprofits, and this is going beyond it, and Chris knows we're looking at trying to spin that off into a nonprofit eventually, but I think that's a long time coming, and it is a department that needs some love, and I just do not have the time for it, nor does it fit. It's not a good use of county resources to use me to help the Family Support Center, in my opinion. So just keeping that in mind as we go forward.
Okay.
And I will make
So
a couple
Christy-
of comments, if I may, Mary.
Yes, yes.
I think this is a really terrific start to a more efficient organizational chart. I do appreciate that we need to workshop through all the different options, because not having thought about it too much, I'm looking at this structure and thinking that for me, in the Parks, Trails, and Recreation department, it would make sense to have that Parks, Trails, Recreation, and Tourism, because they are all very closely interrelated. And I know that there can be arguments made to not do that, but yeah, just to get the creativity flowing. that might be one thing that I would like to discuss some point along the way, but thanks for this. This looks really much more efficient.
Thanks, yeah. And
So, Chris,
and just to reiterate, it's just a quick sketch. And so, it's all completely open to amendment and whatever. So I just wanted something, to show my thought process and give an example. So this is just, for discussion's sake only.
Chris, do you see this as a phased-in project
Yeah,
process?
I think probably that's the most realistic way to look at it. And it kind of leads into something I wanted to point out is that, we've got Elaine's travel council director job description amendment to economic development director. And it kind of, is anticipating the creation of an economic development department. That's not on the agenda. It's something that would have to happen down the road. And so, but I think it's fine to move forward, with that, anticipating the creation of the economic development department. I guess the question is, do we want to just kind of deal with the community development department and the economic development department sort of first, and then kind of progress forward from there? I don't think it's necessarily essential that we do the entire county all at once, but we are in a situation where community development and economic development are in a transition phase. And so I would want to probably try to establish, those departments, regardless of what we decide to do with the rest, kind of in similar fashion to how I've already started down the road with personnel services, as we make these transitions, start to build in a logical organizational that goes with them. But it probably, makes sense to try to do it in as big a picture way as possible, even though it may not be entirely possible to do it all at once, because you really have the greatest number of options available to you if you look at it in the big picture sense, as opposed to piece it together. And so I would, I'm wanting to have this bigger picture discussion like this, show kind of an organizational structure like this, so that if we decide to move forward with just community development and economic development, that we at least have some concept of what could happen with the rest of the county also. And make sure that we're not, missing something big or overlooking something.
With the economic development department, you're not thinking at this point that we'd have to hire another person. It will be just a job description
So yeah,
change?
I think that, to be quite honest right now, we don't really have a lot of resources for diversification. And so with the job description reclassification, there's a shift in grade to reflect taking on those diversified economic development duties. But to be quite honest, at this point, I think that's all we can afford is just that. Down the road, I think, though, that taking the rest of the travel council staff's job descriptions and retooling those also to incorporate diversification into those job descriptions makes sense. But we decided at this point that, Elaine kind of wants to just wrap her head around everything that's available and all the duties and just start to sort out what diversification means. And then she'll have a better idea of how to amend her other staff's job descriptions to enable them to also engage with diversification. But we have to realize that because the Travel Council right now is, entirely funded by TRT, they're restricted to tourism, recreation, and film. And so if we engage with diversification, we're going to have to transfer general fund money into this fund. And so we have to keep that in, take that into account as we progress, you know, that it's something that we're going to have to move along as we can afford.
And Chris, what did you say about the community development? Did you think there was a path forward to that one in the near future, or is that going to have to?
Well, there is, but I think that we'll have to, you know, engage in more discussion with staff and the current, you know, department heads and staff. You know, and I think that, you know, Bill expressed to me, and I think he's here and he can speak of it if he wants also, but, you know, there's some concern that by going this route, you know, that we could, you know, have somebody who's directing the department that causes problems that, you know, in the building inspection, for instance, that don't currently exist or whatever. I think that that's a possibility no matter what you do, that, you know, and you always have to be on the lookout that somebody's not causing more problems than they're solving, obviously. But, you know, and I was fairly frank with Bill also in that, you know, in the more than 10 years that I've been around and engaged with Grand County and planning and building inspection, there's always been some friction between those two departments. They haven't, you know, worked together as well as I think they should have. And I think, you know, most can probably agree that that's the case. And so I'm interested in seeing enhanced collaboration and enhanced information flow and whatnot going back and forth. And I think, you know, part of the reason really, quite honestly, is that they've just been independent of one another. They haven't, there's been no real leader tying both of them together necessarily. That position's never existed and that organizational structure's never existed. But yeah, I think that, you know, it's got to be worked out between staff, department heads, the council. But there are concerns, you know, and I'm perfectly okay with anybody expressing whatever their concerns are.
Yeah, if I could say, yeah, and I think it's going to be important that everyone in these, as they currently are, departments, are really forward and getting a lot of collaboration and input from folks like Bill, from folks like that are in planning and zoning, from, you know, the Sand Flats, Grand Center, all of these, because really what I'm seeing is the crux of this sketch working is figuring out how that, if we're not going to have a department director, you know, how are we going to get creative and innovative about managing that collaboration, particularly in reference to this sketch, particularly within community development and this parks, trails, and recreation. Obviously, totally hypothetical. I'm acknowledging that, but you know, because you know, really, those just become more direct, sort of direct council or direct administrator reports, unless there's effective collaboration amongst those groups and everyone willingly wants to participate in a system. And it looks like, you know, because personnel services already has a director, economic development might also have a director after tonight, road department, same, you know, those are kind of already, you know, those look to be, you know, reaching the, you know, going into park. But these other departments really, you know, I think it'll be an interesting challenge. But I do like the structure and I do like the idea for sure.
Anyone
Chris,
else?
I have a question.
And
Go ahead.
How do we see within this structure of kind of breaking out divisions, the change of form of government as well? We feel like that might disrupt this. I don't know that it necessarily will, especially if we end up with the council manager form of government, because we keep it kind of in line, but.
I guess that would depend on I mean, if it goes to a council manager forum, then the manager, would kind of have a lot more executive control, I guess, over this whole organizational chart. But I would say that there's not necessarily any reason why it would be any different. It could be the same or it could be different. It just depends on how that manager seeks to reorganize. And I'm not really sure if the council would maintain control over organizational structure or not. I guess I haven't really thought about that. I'd have to maybe look at the optional plan for government and try to determine whether or not the council would be responsible for establishing organizational structure still or not. I'm not sure, actually. But there's no reason why this wouldn't work under council manager just the same as it would work right now. Because all of these departments and divisions would still fall under that same executive authority that comes through the governing body's executive authority and that part of statute.
Any other questions? So it looks like we're going to move ahead with the economic development and have some further discussion on the planning, zoning, as we move forward to hiring someone.
Yeah, and I think that, as we take a look at the applicants and consider, the person that gets hired, there's some possibility that person may affect, how we organize the department. One of the applicants has civil engineering degree and credentials, which could alter the way that we structure the department, based on the actual human capital that we end up with.
Do we have any other questions from any other council members or people on the phone?
Mary, let me just say that I don't think it's quite accurate to say we're going to move on with economic development as that department. I know that we have that job description approval on the books tonight, but I would think that would take a council vote, and we don't have that vote on the agenda.
Yeah, you're correct. I was, yes. Anyone else?
And yeah, just to clarify, I mean, at this point, the only thing that would really change if Elaine's job description were approved would be that, the additional duties, economic development duties would, fall under her purview, and the grade would change to reflect those additional duties. But beyond that, there's not any restructuring changes. And so it'd really just be in content and context only, and so down the road, if we decide to do something different, then obviously we'd have to, maybe change the job description title. I don't know, but, in terms of just moving forward with regard to putting those diversified economic development duties into Elaine's job description, that's what's on the agenda, not a restructuring at this point. Any questions about that?
Any further questions? Christina, where did you think that what used to be called the Christmas Box House, but the family supports Center, where did you think that would fit?
I think that would fit well under the Assistant Council Administrator as its own thing, sort of like how we address the public library.
Okay,
And the Family Sports Center is trying to do more of its of their own financial reporting and grant writing, but I know the administrator's office has provided a lot of support for that also in the past.
thank you.
So Christina, I know that the previous director was scheduled to retire. Has she done that? And is there a new director?
No, we opted with COVID and everything crazy going on. She ended up staying on. And she's an angel. Sherilyn is an angel. She does amazing work. But we do need to put some energy into allowing her to retire and, you know, transitioning the Family Support Center, you know, to a new director. She's been there a long time.
Yeah, I guess while we have a little bit of time, I also at some point want to, you know, discuss the potential for reclassifying a position in the clerk's office that's currently vacant. And I've discussed this with Quinn a little bit, to bring on a grant specialist. And I think that one of the struggles with Family Support Center and in other places all across the county is that we don't have anybody that's really specializes or focuses on grants. That has a lot of implications in terms of how effectively and efficiently a lot of elements of the county operate, but it also affects our ability to procure resources and leverage the funds that we have to get, more grant resources. And so I think that, I've discussed with Quinn a little bit, presenting an amendment to one of his clerk deputies to be sort of a grant specialist type position. And I think that, Quinn probably understands now having to do a lot of the grant reporting and but it's one of the most intellectually demanding positions, that would probably be in his office, and certainly probably would require some grade increase in order to get the kind of person that we would need that would have the intellectual horsepower to really deal with a lot of those complexities. But I also think that since it's a grant position and a resource development position, that it would probably pay for itself and then some. And so, just to give a heads up that that's something that we've been thinking about. I think it's something that's been, missing forever in the county, and we could really use somebody to coordinate, grants across the entire county, and also to have somebody that's, whose job it is to always be on the lookout for those types of opportunities.
I'll back that up, what Chris said. Some of even just dealing with the Family Support Center and getting those reimbursement requests submitted is quite time consuming. And we would, eventually it doesn't have to happen this week or next week, but Chris and I have talked about that, and moving that into a little bit higher grade position and potentially filling that with someone that could bring those resources to the county would take a huge load off both myself and Janice Smith, and also, like Chris pointed out, probably pay for itself in the long run.
All right.
Thank you for recognizing that need, and look forward to having that conversation.
Yeah, I'll echo that. And also, having gone through one round of grant writing with Sherry Lynn, it's a big job, and trying to work through those reimbursement requests. So I think I've thought we've needed that for a long time too. I'm glad that it might be coming to us.
Okay. Yeah, Quinn and I will work on that, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, you got to find the right person for it, because it's very demanding. All the grants are different. They all have very different requirements for application and reporting. And so you need somebody that's capable of being, you know, very detail oriented and a good writer, and, you know, somebody that's just pretty sharp. And so I think that, you know, it'd be a good decision to make, even if it ended up, you know, being a little bit more money for the position. I do think that it would come out as a net gain for sure. All right, any other discussion for our workshop? Okay, Mary, you want to just do recess until whenever the next meeting starts? 4, I believe. Can't hear you. I think we lost your phone, it looks like, Mary. Maybe you can use your computer.
We still can't hear you.
Jalen,
Jalen, wrap it up.
Okay.
going to recess until
If
4.
if there are no other comments, I would like to recess this meeting, the Grand County Council, until 4 o'clock, at which time our regular meeting will begin.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.